On the morning of December 1st, 1944, at precisely 10:42, Lieutenant Alfred Rose hauled himself into the gunner's position of an M36 Jackson tank destroyer stationed on elevated terrain northeast of Beak, Germany. He was getting acquainted with controls that felt completely foreign to him, while German armored units patrolled the landscape roughly 2 miles distant. He was 26 years old, had spent just 3 weeks with the 8114th Tank Destroyer Battalion, and had 0 confirmed enemy kills. The Germans had positioned components of their 5th Panzer Army throughout the Rhineland sector, including no fewer than 40 Panther tanks whose thick frontal plating could bounce American shells from 800 yards out. Rose's unit had suffered the loss of 11 tank destroyers throughout November alone. 17 crew members had been killed. The deadly pattern never varied. German gunners acquired American positions first, opened fire first. American crews perished before comprehending what struck them. The M10 Wolverine tank destroyers they'd been operating couldn't punch through Panther armor beyond 500 yards. By the time American crews closed to a distance suitable for a killing blow, German 88mm cannons had already transformed their vehicles into flaming tombs. The Army's answer had arrived in September, the M36 Jackson, mounting a 90mm main cannon on a Sherman chassis, the most formidable American tank gun deployed in Europe. It possessed the capability to pierce 5.6 inches of armor plating at 1,500 yards. Theoretically, it solved the Panther dilemma. Practically, Rose had discharged exactly 4 practice rounds through the weapon. He was unfamiliar with the reticle graduations, uncertain about the range-finding methodology, didn't know whether the telescopic sight's calibrations corresponded to the technical documentation or some undocumented field adjustment. His commanding officer had instructed him to master the system quickly. The battalion was being relocated to provide support for Operation Clipper, the offensive to eliminate German forces from the Siegfried Line fortifications surrounding Geilenkirchen. Intelligence reports indicated German armor launching counterattacks across the entire sector. Panthers, Tiger tanks, self-propelled artillery, the type of adversaries that demanded gunners intimately familiar with their equipment. Rose examined the M36F telescopic sight position before the gunner's station. The reticle displayed range graduations in 100-yard intervals. The furthest marking indicated 4,600 yards maximum effective distance, 2.61 miles. He'd never encountered anyone engaging armor at such an extreme distance. Tank confrontations occurred at 500 yards, perhaps 1,000 with favorable geography. Anything exceeding that fell into artillery territory. If you're curious about how Rose's intensive training in the M36's capabilities played out, please tap that like button. It enables us to distribute more overlooked narratives from the Second World War. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. Now back to Rose. The Jackson's turret offered minimal space. The loader occupied his left side, the commander positioned above and behind, the assistant driver and driver situated down in the hull. Rose ran his fingers across the traverse mechanisms, the elevation dial, the trigger assembly. Everything seemed alien. 3 weeks provided insufficient time to cultivate the instinctive responses that preserved gunners' lives. He required months. He possessed hours. The elevated ground northeast of Beak provided unobstructed sightlines across the German terrain. Wide fields, intermittent tree coverage, a roadway running roughly parallel to their location. Ideal terrain for target acquisition. Equally ideal terrain for being detected. German artillery observers had been directing fire throughout the week. The battalion had adopted dispersed positioning, never grouping more than 2 vehicles in proximity. Rose pressed his face to the rubber eyepiece of the M76F sight. The optics appeared pristine. Magnification proved adequate. He rehearsed scanning across the horizon, familiarizing himself with how the reticle shifted as he modified elevation. The range graduations were exact: 400, 800, 1,200, extending all the way to that terminal marking at 4,600 yards. At 11:15, motion attracted his attention at the very periphery of his viewing field. Something dark, geometric, advancing slowly across his field of view at a distance that appeared impossible for direct engagement. The target was traversing left to right across Rose's perspective at what he calculated was extreme distance. Through the M76F telescopic sight, the shape materialized into the unmistakable profile of a German Panther tank. Squat silhouette, extended gun tube, the distinctive angled armor that rendered frontal penetration virtually impossible. It was proceeding along what seemed to be a road or highway, moving at approximately 6 to 8 mile perio. Rose's initial impulse was to relay the sighting and allow someone else to handle it. The distance had to exceed 2 miles. Nobody engaged tanks at 2 miles. The ballistic arc alone would send rounds sailing above the target or burying into the earth hundreds of yards shy. The lateral wind would deflect projectiles off trajectory. The tolerance for error at such a distance was quantified in fractions of degrees. Yet the Panther wasn't maneuvering evasively, wasn't executing defensive tactics. It was advancing in a linear path along that remote road, completely oblivious that an American tank destroyer was tracking it from high ground 2.5 miles away. The kind of opportunity that materialized once in a conflict. If fortune smiled on you, the kind Rose possessed precisely zero experience addressing. He verified the reticle once more. The M36F sight had been engineered for the 90mm cannon specifically. The range graduations weren't random. They'd been computed based on the gun's muzzle velocity, the standard armor-piercing round's ballistic properties, and typical engagement circumstances. The engineers who created this sight had incorporated that 4,600-yard marking deliberately. They had confidence the gun could reach that far. Whether it could strike anything at such a distance remained an entirely different matter. Rose started computing. The Panther was moving perpendicular to his location. That indicated he'd need to lead the target. At 2.5 miles, the round would require multiple seconds to arrive at impact. Throughout that interval, the Panther would maintain its movement. He'd need to aim ahead of the tank by dozens of yards, potentially more. The precise computation demanded knowing the exact distance, the target's exact velocity, and the projectile's flight duration. He possessed none of these figures with certainty. The M36 Jackson carried 2 varieties of main gun ammunition. The M82 armor-piercing capped round was engineered for penetrating armor. It contained a substantial explosive charge that detonated following penetration, maximizing internal destruction. At 500 yards, it could breach 5.1 inches of armor. At 1,000 yards, 4.8 inches. At 4,600 yards, the penetration charts in the technical manual simply ceased listing figures. The presumption was that nobody would endeavor shots at that distance. Rose comprehended the physics. Every yard of distance meant additional velocity reduction, increased drop, greater wind deflection. By the time an M82 round traversed 4,600 yards, it would have sacrificed significant kinetic energy. It might fail to penetrate the Panther's frontal armor, even upon impact. However, the Panther's lateral armor presented a different scenario. 40 to 50 millimeter thickness, 1.6 to 2 inches. Susceptible to the 90mm gun, even at extended distance. The target maintained its steady advancement across the distant highway. Rose reached a determination that contradicted every principle of tank destroyer doctrine he'd been instructed in. He was going to attempt the shot, not because he believed it would succeed, but because this represented the sole method to discover if the M36's systems could genuinely function at their theoretical maximum distance. His hand shifted to the traverse control. He initiated tracking the Panther, maintaining it centered in the reticle while his mind processed the variables he'd need to consider. Rose announced the sighting to his commander without removing his eye from the telescopic sight. Panther, extreme distance, moving laterally. The commander ascended beside him, peered through his own optics and remained silent for 5 seconds. When he responded, his answer was straightforward. Rose's decision. Rose's shot. The loader's shot. The loader's already had an M82 armor-piercing round chambered. Standard operating procedure. Tank destroyers maintained AP rounds loaded constantly when in combat areas. Rose concentrated on the ranging challenge. The M76F sight displayed distance markings, but estimating range to a moving target at 2.5 miles demanded more than approximating with the reticle. He needed to bracket the target with ranging shots. Ranging fire constituted standard practice for artillery. Shoot short, shoot long. Walk the rounds onto target until you identified the correct elevation and lead. For a tank destroyer, engaging armor at 400 yards, ranging fire meant suicide. It revealed your position, provided the enemy opportunity to counterfire or reposition. But at 4,600 yards, the Panther crew wouldn't detect the shots, wouldn't observe the muzzle flash, wouldn't realize they were being engaged until rounds began impacting near their location. Rose established the elevation for what he estimated was 4,000 yards, short of where he believed the target actually was. He wanted to observe where the round impacted so he could recalibrate. The traverse controls enabled him to follow the Panther's movement. The tank was sustaining steady velocity along that distant highway. Rose led the target by approximately 50 yards, his optimal guess at compensating for the Panther's forward motion during the projectile's flight time. He depressed the firing trigger. The 90mm gun's recoil jolted the entire turret. The muzzle blast was enormous. Even with the double baffle muzzle brake, the Army had begun installing in November. Smoke and debris obscured the sight picture for 2 seconds. When it dissipated, Rose kept his eye fixed to the optic.
watching for impact. At 4,000 yards, the time of flight was roughly 6 seconds. Rose counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nothing discernible. The distance was too vast to observe the actual impact through the telescopic sight. He'd need to fire again and watch for dust plumes or ground disruption that might indicate where the round landed. He adjusted elevation upward, added another 100 yards to his calculation. The Panther was still advancing along the highway, seemingly unaware that someone was firing at it from a distance that surpassed normal tank engagement ranges by a multiple of 4. Rose led the target again, this time by 60 yards to compensate for increased flight time at the longer distance. Second shot. The gun discharged. Recoil. Smoke. Rose maintained the sight trained on the area where he anticipated impact. 6 seconds of flight time, maybe 7 at this range. He counted again while keeping the Panther centered in his field of view. The target continued its steady advancement. No sign it was executing evasive maneuvers. No indication its crew had detected the American position on the high ground northeast of Beak. Then Rose observed it. A small dust cloud erupting on the highway surface approximately 20 yards short of the Panther's position. The round had impacted close. Very close. Close enough that Rose now possessed concrete data for his final adjustment. He knew the range. He knew the lead. He knew the ballistic drop. He executed one final elevation correction. Added 10 yards to his lead computation to account for the Panther's continued forward movement. Set the range marking on the reticle to exactly 4,600 yards. The maximum marking on the M36F telescopic sight. He waited for the Panther to advance into the precise position where his calculations indicated the round would intercept the target's path. The moment materialized. Rose fired the third shot. The 90mm round covered 4,600 yards in approximately 7 seconds. Rose kept the Panther centered in his telescopic sight, observing for impact. The M82 armor-piercing projectile was traveling at roughly 1,500 feet per second when it exited the muzzle. By the time it reached maximum range, velocity had declined significantly, but physics favored Rose in one critical aspect. The Panther's side armor was only 40 to 50 millimeters thick. Even a depleted 90mm round retained sufficient kinetic energy to penetrate that. The strike was visible through the M76F sight, as a brilliant flash on the Panther's left side hull. Rose had led the target flawlessly. The round struck the tank just behind the front road wheel, precisely where the side armor was thinnest, and where the ammunition storage compartments were situated. The impact was followed instantaneously by a larger secondary detonation. The Panther's own 79 rounds of 75mm ammunition exploding inside the fighting compartment. The German tank jerked to a halt. Smoke began billowing from the turret hatches. The crew would be deceased or dying. A direct penetration into the ammunition storage area at that location meant catastrophic internal devastation. The blast would have killed the loader instantly. The pressure wave would have incapacitated everyone else in the turret. Even if some crew members survived the initial detonation, they had seconds to evacuate before the fire reached the fuel tanks. Rose didn't cease firing. Standard procedure for tank destroyer crews was to continue engaging until the target was confirmed destroyed. A stationary tank wasn't necessarily an eliminated tank. German crews were trained to feign destruction, waiting for American units to advance past before restarting their vehicles and attacking from the rear. Rose had heard accounts from other battalions about Panthers that had absorbed multiple hits, appeared knocked out, then returned to action 30 minutes later, after crews executed field repairs. He reloaded with another M82 armor-piercing round and fired again. Fourth shot, identical point of aim. The round impacted the Panther's hull near the original penetration point. By now, the internal fire was spreading. The fifth shot utilized high explosive instead of armor-piercing. Rounds were devastating against stationary vehicles. The explosion tore away external components and ensured the fire would consume everything inside the tank. Rose fired a sixth round, then a seventh. He continued firing until flames were visibly erupting from every hatch and vision port on the Panther. The thick black smoke characteristic of burning diesel fuel ascended from the wreck in a column that would be visible for miles. There was no possibility of that crew surviving. No possibility of that tank returning to operation. The engagement had lasted approximately 2 minutes from first shot to confirmed destruction. Rose had expended 7 90mm rounds, 3 for ranging, 4 to ensure annihilation. The range was 4,600 yards, 2.61 miles. The maximum effective range of the M76F telescopic sight mounted in the M36 Jackson. When Rose finally withdrew from the sight, his hands were trembling. Not from terror, from the realization of what he'd just accomplished. He'd destroyed a Panther tank at a range that exceeded every engagement distance he'd ever encountered in armored warfare. The shot would enter the 804th Tank Destroyer Battalion's after-action report. It would be witnessed and verified by his commander and the other crew members in the Jackson. It would become part of the official record. What Rose didn't know was that his confirmed kill at 4,600 yards would remain the second longest tank versus tank engagement in military history for the next 47 years, only 500 yards short of a record that wouldn't be surpassed until a British Challenger tank executed an impossible shot during the Gulf War in 1991. The burning Panther remained visible on the distant highway for the next 30 minutes. Other American units in the sector reported the smoke column. Forward observers attempted to determine if it was a knocked-out German vehicle or a destroyed American position. The 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion's operations officer eventually confirmed the kill through map coordinates and timeline correlation. Rose's position on the high ground northeast of Beak aligned perfectly with the sightlines to the burning wreck. By 1300 hours, word of the shot had circulated through the battalion. A lieutenant nobody had heard of 3 weeks prior had just executed the longest confirmed tank destroyer kill in the European theater. Crews from other M36 Jacksons started posing questions. What range marking did he utilize? How many ranging shots? What was the lead calculation? Rose didn't have precise answers. He'd fired by instinct and physics, not by some repeatable formula other gunners could memorize. The M36 Jackson had only been in combat since September, 4 months of service. American tank destroyer battalions had spent most of 1944 fighting with the M10 Wolverine, a vehicle whose 3-inch gun couldn't reliably penetrate German heavy armor beyond 600 yards. The M18 Hellcat was faster but carried the same underpowered gun. When Panthers and Tigers started appearing in substantial numbers during the Normandy campaign, American crews found themselves outgunned at every engagement range. The 90mm gun altered that equation. It was adapted from anti-aircraft artillery, a weapon designed to reach bombers at 15,000 feet altitude. Mounting that gun in a mobile turret on a Sherman-based chassis gave American forces their first vehicle capable of engaging German heavy armor on equal terms. The M36 could penetrate Panther frontal armor at 1,000 yards. It could destroy Tigers at ranges where the Tiger's 88mm gun struggled to penetrate the M36's frontal slope. But the weapon's true capability extended far beyond normal engagement distances. The 90mm M3 gun had a muzzle velocity of 2,700 feet per second. The M82 armor-piercing round weighed 24 pounds. Basic physics dictated that combination could reach targets at 4,000 yards or more. The question wasn't whether the gun could shoot that far. The question was whether anyone could aim accurately enough to strike a moving tank at that distance. Rose had answered that question, not through superior training, not through months of practice, through 2 ranging shots that provided him the data he needed to make the third shot count. The engagement demonstrated something the Army's Ordnance Department had suspected but never confirmed in combat. The M76F telescopic sight's maximum range marking of 4,600 yards wasn't theoretical, it was functional. German forces in the sector continued operating Panthers throughout December. Rose's battalion encountered them regularly during the advance toward the Roer River, but none of those engagements occurred at extreme range. German crews had learned from 2 years of fighting on the Eastern Front. They utilized terrain, they avoided open ground. They positioned their tanks in concealed positions where American forces would have to close to within 500 yards to achieve clear shots. The conditions that enabled Rose's shot were unique: high ground providing elevation advantage, open terrain with unobstructed sightlines, a German crew moving along an exposed highway without implementing tactical precautions, and a gunner who was willing to attempt something that doctrine declared impossible. Those conditions wouldn't replicate themselves for the remainder of the war. By mid-December, the German counteroffensive in the Ardennes pulled most American armored units away from the Roser sector. The 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion redeployed to support operations against the Bulge. Rose would fire his M36's 90mm gun many more times before Germany surrendered in May, but he would never again attempt a shot at 4,600 yards. The Battle of the Bulge commenced 16 days after Rose's record shot. On December 16th, German forces launched their massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest. 3 entire armies, 200,000 troops, 600 tanks, including the newest Panthers and King Tigers. The offensive caught American forces completely unprepared. Within 48 hours, German armored spearheads had penetrated 30 miles into Allied lines. The 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion received emergency orders on December 18th. Redeploy south immediately, support the 7th Armored Division at St. Vith. The town was a critical road junction. If German forces captured it, they would have direct access to the Meuse River crossings. The entire northern shoulder of the American defensive line would collapse. Rose's company moved through Belgium in darkness. The roads were chaotic. Supply trucks heading west away from the German advance, infantry units attempting to reach defensive positions, artillery batteries repositioning under fire. The 8th arrived at St. Vith on December 19th and immediately engaged. German Panther battalions were already attacking American positions on the eastern approaches to the town. The fighting around St. Vith bore no resemblance to Rose's long-range engagement at Beak. This was close-quarters armor combat. Panthers emerging from tree lines at 300 yards. American tank destroyers firing from behind burning buildings. German infantry with Panzerfausts hunting M36s through village streets. The kind of fighting where the side that detected first won, where hesitation measured in seconds meant death. Rose's Jackson took up position on the southern edge of St. Vith on December 20th. His field of fire covered a road junction where German armor was anticipated to attack. The range was 800 yards, standard engagement distance, no complex calculations required. Just aim the 90mm gun at center mass and fire when targets appeared. The attack materialized at dawn on December 21st. 4 Panthers supported by 2 companies of Panzer Grenadiers. Rose's company knocked out 2 Panthers in the first minute of fighting. German return fire destroyed 1 M36 and damaged 2 others. The engagement lasted 14 minutes. When it concluded, all 4 German tanks were burning, and the infantry had withdrawn. American casualties were 3 tank destroyers destroyed, 11 crew members dead or wounded. Rose survived St. Vith. His Jackson absorbed 2 hits from German 75mm guns, both deflected by the frontal armor. The M36's sloped glasses plate was effectively 140mm thick when struck at angle. German guns struggled to penetrate it beyond 600 yards, but the open-topped turret was vulnerable to artillery airbursts and plunging fire. Several M36s in the battalion were knocked out by indirect fire during the week-long defense of St. Vith. By December 23rd, American forces had to evacuate the town. German pressure was overwhelming. The 7th Armored Division conducted a fighting withdrawal westward. The 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion provided rear guard, engaging German pursuit forces at every defensible position. Rose fired his 90mm gun 43 times during the withdrawal, all at ranges under 1,000 yards, all at targets he could observe clearly through his telescopic sight. The contrast with his December 1st engagement was absolute. At Beak, he'd possessed time to calculate, time to range his shots, time to methodically engage a target that was unaware it was being hunted. At St. Vith, and during the withdrawal, combat transpired at reflex speed. Identify target, acquire target, fire. No ranging shots, no careful calculations, just the desperate mathematics of kill or be killed armor warfare. Rose would never forget the Panther burning on that distant highway at 4,600 yards, but the shots that kept him alive, through the Bulge, were the ones he executed at point-blank range, against tanks that were shooting back. The 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion spent January 1945 reconstituting after the Bulge. The battalion had lost 19 M36 Jacksons during the German offensive, 26 crew members killed, 41 wounded. Replacement vehicles arrived from depot stocks in France. Replacement crews came straight from training facilities in the United States. Most had never fired a 90mm gun in combat. Rose found himself training the new gunners, instructing them on the M76F telescopic sight, explaining how to estimate range, how to lead moving targets, how to adjust for wind and elevation. The new crews inquired about his 4,600-yard shot. Rose told them to disregard it. That kind of engagement occurred once in a war. What they needed to master was how to kill Panthers at 500 yards while under fire. That was the skill that kept tank destroyer crews alive. By February, the battalion was back in action. American forces were advancing toward the Rhine River. German resistance was collapsing, but remained fierce at key defensive positions. Panthers and King Tigers still appeared wherever the Wehrmacht attempted to hold ground. The M36 Jackson remained the most effective American answer to German heavy armor. Its 90mm gun could penetrate any German tank from the front at normal combat ranges. Rose participated in the Rhine crossing operations in March. His Jackson was part of the support element for the 9th Army's assault near Wessel. German forces on the East Bank included elements of 3 panzer divisions. The fighting was intense but brief. American air superiority and overwhelming artillery support shattered German defensive positions within 48 hours. Rose's company knocked out 6 Panthers and 2 King Tigers during the crossing, all at ranges under 800 yards. April brought the final push into Germany's industrial heartland. The 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion advanced through the Ruhr pocket, engaging scattered German resistance. Most German armor units had been destroyed, or had run out of fuel. The Panthers and Tigers that had dominated European battlefields for 2 years were burning wrecks or abandoned hulls scattered across hundreds of miles of terrain. Rose saw his last combat action on April 23 near the Elbe River. A single Panther appeared from a farm complex at approximately 600 yards. The German crew was attempting to retreat eastward ahead of American forces. Rose engaged with 2 rounds, both hits. The Panther burned. It was his 47th confirmed kill with the M36's 90mm gun. 46 of those kills occurred at ranges under 1,000 yards. Germany surrendered on May 8. The 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion received orders to prepare for redeployment to the Pacific Theater. The plan was to equip the battalion with newer M36 variants and utilize them against Japanese armor in the expected invasion of the home islands. The atomic bombs dropped in August made that invasion unnecessary. Rose never fired the 90mm gun in combat again. The after-action reports from December 1, 1944 remained in the battalion's official records. Lieutenant Alfred Rose, M36 Jackson, Panther destroyed at 4,600 yards, witnessed and verified. The shot was documented in multiple Army publications over the following decades. Military historians analyzing tank warfare cited it as evidence of the M36's capabilities. Gunnery instructors utilized it as an example of what was theoretically possible with proper ranging and calculation. But the shot's real significance wasn't the distance. It was what the engagement revealed about the evolution of armored warfare. The M36 Jackson represented the culmination of American tank destroyer development during the Second World War, a vehicle that could engage and destroy the most heavily armored German tanks at ranges that exceeded anything Doctrine had anticipated. Rose's shot at 4,600 yards proved the weapon could perform at the absolute limits of its design specifications, and for 47 years, that record stood as the second longest tank kill in military history. The record Rose established on December 1, 1944 remained unbroken through Korea, through Vietnam, through decades of Cold War tank development and doctrine refinement. The United States Army continued improving its armored vehicle capabilities. Better guns, better fire control systems, better ammunition, but no American tank crew ever documented a confirmed kill at a greater range than Rose's 4,600 yards. The British Army broke the record on February 26. A Challenger 1 main battle tank with the call sign 11B was operating in Iraq during Operation Desert Storm. The crew spotted an Iraqi tank at extreme range during the ground war to liberate Kuwait. The gunner fired a depleted uranium round using advanced fire control computers and thermal imaging systems that didn't exist in 1944. The round impacted at 5,100 yards, 3.1 miles, the longest confirmed tank versus tank kill in military history. Rose's shot fell to second place, but context matters. The Challenger crew in 1991 had laser rangefinders, ballistic computers, stabilized gun platforms, digital fire control systems that automatically calculated lead and elevation. Rose had mechanical controls, an optical sight, and 3 years of wartime experience compressed into 3 weeks. He executed his shot with tools from 1944, against a target moving at maximum engagement range in combat conditions. The M36 Jackson remained in American service through the Korean War. The vehicle performed well against North Korean and Chinese armor. Its 90mm gun could penetrate any tank the communist forces deployed, but engagement ranges in Korea
were typically much shorter than in Europe. Mountain terrain and limited sight lines meant most tank battles occurred at ranges under 500 yards. No gunner replicated Rose's extreme range engagement. Rose survived the war. He left active duty in 1946 and returned to civilian life. The Army attempted to recruit him for gunnery instructor positions at Fort Knox, but he declined. He'd spent 3 years shooting at people. He was finished. The records show he never spoke publicly about his December 1st engagement. No interviews, no memoirs, no attempts to capitalize on being part of military history. The after-action reports remained in the archives. Historians discovered them decades later while researching tank destroyer operations in Northwest Europe. The engagement at 4,600 yards appeared in several academic papers on armored warfare. Military analysts used it as a case study in the limits of direct fire engagement. The shot represented the absolute maximum effective range for Second World War-era tank guns operating under ideal conditions. If this story resonated with you the way it resonated with us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about tank destroyer gunners who saved lives with calculations and cold precision. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Lieutenant Alfred Rose doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.